Welcome to the Spark of Ages podcast. Today we're joined by Indy Sen, the ecosystem marketing lead at Canva. Indy's got one of those careers that reads like a who's who of tech giants. He started on the ground floor of Salesforce App Exchange. You know, back then when they were trying to figure out how to make developers actually build on their platform. From there, he went to Box to take on SharePoint and literally had billboards that said SharePoint sucks. Led developer relations at MuleSoft, did a tour of duty at Google Workspace, and even helped WeWork completely overhaul their product marketing before helping Matterport go public. What makes Indy really fascinating is his unique approach to product marketing and messaging. He has a, quote, messaging as an API, quote, philosophy, basically treating company messaging like clean code that's clear, concise, and repeatable. It's that blend of technical mindset and marketing expertise that makes Indy such a great guest. Indy grew up in France, studied economics and international relations at Brown, and got his MBA from MIT Sloan. Some of the key takeaways you can expect from this episode: innovative approaches to product marketing and messaging, lessons from practical go-to-market strategies and ecosystem building experiences, insights into strategic career development and the importance of having skin in the game within the technology industry. And finally, the enduring significance of human connections in an increasingly AI-driven technological landscape. Indy, welcome to the Spark of Ages.
Rajiv, thank you so much for having me. I'm so pumped to be here and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Well, yeah, Indy, it's going to be great. I'm really excited to have you here. My team does a lot of work in building creative for companies and building content for companies. And so they were super excited when I was bringing in this leader from Canva, because our team many times will do their creative design work in Adobe, but then we'll move to Canva as part of driving adaptations, because we go after middle market and above companies. And so Canva is a great way to, once you get that initial design in, to then give it to the client, say, make an adaptation here, make an adaptation there, change the language here. And like, they've even done that for me when I was doing some stuff for a HBS club. They're like, here's all this. You can change stuff yourself. You don't have to know Photoshop. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. So really excited to have you and learn about what you've done with ecosystem marketing. We had Bobby Napoltonia, who was at Salesforce App Exchange, one of the creators, right? So we got this great combination. Just to let folks know, Canva is still a private company. It's one of those Australian wonders, kind of like Atlassian. You guys have built a massive audience going from PLG all the way up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm reading things like 220 million monthly active users, up from 200 million in October, probably higher now.
Slightly higher. Yeah, we're at 240 million now. The last time we kind of reported that figure, which was just at Viva Tech a couple of weeks ago. So yeah.
Yeah, and really, I think when I think about what you guys have done at Canva, it's taking what used to be difficult or what people thought was somewhat approachable with Adobe products and making it super easy to use, making design available for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I think our mission at Canva has always been centered around empowering the world to design, right? So it stemmed from this notion that, there's a lot of people who especially in this day and age, and Canva is only like 11, 12 years old, right? Like I think we had a 10th birthday 2 years ago, it all came from this notion that, as you were mentioning, Rajiv, right? Like people everywhere, visual communication is now more and more of a thing, right? If you think about in business, obviously you transact in presentations and one pagers and visuals, emails, those kind of things, right? But even in your personal life, as more and more people are distributed geographically and it's easier than ever to keep in touch with friends and family, like even anything as simple as designing like a birthday card or like a holiday greeting, right? That's something where initially, and ironically, that's really where Canva first started, was empowering the consumers to be able to have the latest and greatest design tools and make design easy, so that you don't have to pay an arm and a leg to get design software where you only use maybe 5% of the features and so on, right? And also to remove the complexity of using that software. So, I think we really saw a sweet spot and an opportunity to empower the world to design. And now, fast forward to today, taking that ease of use as well as that simplicity, right? Like we have a value at Canva call, which is make the simple things, make the complex things simple, right? Is to really kind of abstract all the complexity out of the design process and really think about what the job to be done is. And as we have gone more upstream and selling into the enterprise, we're seeing tons of pockets of opportunity to kind of enable these teams, whether it's marketing, sales, to work design better.
Yeah, you've gone to so many places from that original root of being very consumer oriented, and that's not easy to do, right? So, and I think that brings me up to the conversation we're going to have. I mean, you and I have a whole bunch of good things in common. Before we get started, I'll say,
Yeah.
like, we love products. We're both product marketers at heart. We are from companies that create a lot of content. We both have run marathons.
Nice.
And you went to Brown, and my brother and all of his close friends went to Brown.
Oh,
So
no
we got a
way.
bunch of that going too. We'll get to
I love it.
that. So let me ask, you spent the last couple of years at Canva. You have a deep experience around ecosystems. You've said, quote, a strong product marketing organization acts as a standard bearer for messaging that then serves as a multiplier for the entire company. How does this multiplier effect specifically manifest when nurturing and growing a platform ecosystem? So how should strategic product marketing work with partners and developers instead of just highlighting product features?
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. I love that question because I think it really goes to the heart of what the heart and pulse of a great ecosystem can do for a company. At Canva, one of the things that we did early when I joined was come up with like our own messaging framework for what the ecosystem could do, both internally for Canva, right, as well as externally for our business. And we started internally because, if you think about, and I've seen this before, right, where both at Salesforce or even at Box, where the platform play was not the main thing, even though you could argue now that it totally is, both at Salesforce and even at Box, right? Is how do you make that solution more extensible and integrated with everything else that, a company or team may use in their organization, right? Before, like CRM was a monolith, before content management was a monolith, but now all these solutions need to work in concert and work together. So with ecosystem, our opportunity was to really come and think about like what the messaging would be internally. And the first thing, the word that really came to mind after doing a couple of workshops with our team was that ecosystem is a multiplier, right? Because it's a multiplier for the business. It helps engender brand new innovations, source them from like third-party innovators like developers and technology partners. It's also a multiplier for the business, right? The minute our users see more value coming out of like, a myriad of apps now that we have in the ecosystem. I think we're probably clocking close to like 700 apps now, right? From like, zero about like almost 2 years ago. The innovation coming out of the ecosystem is just insane, right? And I think it's anything from like that, Canva may have the platform to kind of like showcase that functionality, but may not have it's not something that we had on our roadmap, or we didn't have this like sort of spark of like an idea to like say like, hey, what really marketer really needs is easy access to like logos, because as a product marketer you need like company logos, like instead of going to Google and doing an image search and doing a 5-step process to get a SVG version of like a logo of a random company. What if you just had an app for that, right? Like within Canva. And so that's an app called Brand Fetch, which is, maybe not the sexiest app that we have, but so damn useful as a marketer, right? Like
Oh,
if you've
incredible. I
been
mean,
working on the site.
I
Yeah.
don't know how many times we'll sit there and we'll be like, we won this new client. Let's get its logo up there. And we can't find
Yeah.
it on the web page. And I go do a search and I try to find the transparent version. So now I can just take it and say, I'm sure there's some agent, somebody will create an agent that literally says, grab logo, put it in SVG, drop it here, make it transparent, so the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm smiling because that's, yeah, I can't talk about that yet, but that's certainly something we've been thinking about. But you're absolutely right, Rajiv, right? Like, I mean, I think if you think about the pain points, so going back to, the analogy of the multiplier and, what it means to the business, like I think we saw that it was a multiplier for innovation, it was a multiplier for like user satisfaction. And then I think, if we just think about looking externally, right? I think where we've seen so much success in working with like partners and developers is that where the age of like agentic AI, as you mentioned, right? Like where all this innovation is coming so fast and it's so hard as an innovator, as a developer, to kind of like have your product as innovative as it is. There's so many agents out there, right? Like how do you separate the wheat from the chaff? How do you like pierce the signal through noise ratio, right? To like be front and center in front of the users that you want. And I think where we've seen a lot of success, thankfully, as Canva is like, with this apps marketplace that we have, we're like, bar none, like one of the best distribution mechanisms for these innovators to get discovered, right? Like we have, I think I mentioned close to 700 apps now, and your app is just a search term away from being found by 240 million active users, right? And we've seen a lot of like great success stories of like, we have this guy Kai who lives in Singapore. He's a serial Canva app builder. He's now probably working on his fifth or sixth app, and he has this app called Image Upscaler, which just overnight shot up. We looked at this in our dashboards as like one of the most used apps that we have, right? Just in terms of like, Larry Page and Sergey Brin had this analogy at the early days of Google being like, you have a great company, you have a great product, when it's quote unquote a toothbrush product, right? Like something that you
Yeah.
use at least twice a
You
day.
got it. You
Hopefully
got
you
to
should,
use it.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
American Dental Association recommends that for sure, right? But for image upscaler, think about the use case that it helps solve is like you may have like a low res image that you're trying to add to like a design. And what image upscaler does is that it uses AI to kind of fill in the gaps and
Yep.
like upscale that image as this name
And
connotes.
it's great. So you came in as the person to now say, hey, we have this system that originally was a consumer tool that eventually became part of a business tool, and then it started to move to become a platform. And as part of building that platform, there's an ecosystem component to a platform. And so now you need to establish all those relationships and measure all this, right? So that leads me to this question. So for a horizontal platform like Canva, right? Vast array of, you have diverse user bases, individual creators, you have large enterprises. How do you segment and collect actionable qualitative consumer insights that inform your ecosystem strategy? How do you ensure that the voice of the developer or partner for a niche complex use case, like some of the upscaling company, uh, like the upscaler example that you used, doesn't get lost amid broader high volume user feedback? How do you foster and grow that community?
So I think if I start with that initial example of like an image upscaler, right? Like that's one of the things where that's the power of having an open ecosystem, right? Like I think it was there's this guy he wrote one of the first early books, at least for me as a someone coming in marketing and embracing the field of like technology and platforms. He wrote a great book on API. So the guy's name's Kim Lane. He's like this famous evangelist in like the API field. And one of his axioms was that done right, APIs is like self-serve business development, right? So everything that we put out there as a company, and I've seen this at other companies like Box and MuleSoft and so on, right? Like if you do it right, your APIs should be accessible enough where it's easy enough for anybody to by dint of like great documentation, tutorials to kind of get started with them, right?
Right.
And then
It
at the
it
end
just
of
unlocks the creativity of people, of things that you haven't even thought about, right? If you build things
exactly.
as APIs.
Yeah. So that's the first leg of it, right? Is like, like let's make our tools so easy to use to enable developers, to enable our users to design, right? And I think that's where we've seen like some success stories from like the grassroots level, right? Now, I think that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is like looking back at, and Canva does a lot of like research around like what we call like closing customer loops, right? So you might have seen a Canva create back in April, the whole theme of that conference. It's kind of like our own Dreamforce, right? For those who know enterprise software and Salesforce's annual hoopla.
Yep.
Canva Create is like our annual customer conference. And the theme that we had for this year was really around saying like, we are so grateful for all our customers. Here are some of the wishes that you had, right? And obviously they were anchored in like some key things that we were building and looking to build for years now, but that we're saying like, hey, the reason we really wanted to build this was for you, right? We're listening to what you want to do, right? And I think a lot of research done around like what are some of those customer loops that we can close. And when I first came on board, I think it was very clear that out of all those customer loops that we wanted to close, there's only so many that Canva can build, right? So what we try to do is we try to like share with our partners and the ones that we keep close to our ecosystem, especially like the ones that we tap to like use some new frameworks early and those kind of things. We'll give them a sense of like what we're looking for people to build, or what are the jobs to be done that Canva by itself is not going to be able to do, right? Or what are the things that we're hearing from customers where they're saying, we see so much value if Canva can help connect the dots between this workflow and the one that we have in our
Yeah.
for
So one of
design
the
that
things
we
you
can
do to
avail
make
yourself
sure
of.
you don't compete with the folks that are in your
Yeah.
ecosystem, you give them NVIDIA actually is known for this, right? Where they said, this is our space and this is not our space. And we'll build the chip, we'll build CUDA, and then everybody, you can build the rest, right? And I think you guys
Yeah.
are saying, you're saying something very similar, where you're saying we're strong. This is where my app is. These are the features we're going to build. Here's APIs. Now here's a place for you guys to play.
Yeah, as much as we can, we try to like, carve out, that white space for developers and give them that guidance. Now, there are inevitably, like sometimes where there's something that's just so much in
So
demand that,
core, yeah.
so core that we have to bake it into our product, right? Because it's almost like table stakes. And, like I think we still believe that a solution that's of value that's integrated with us, and if a customer is already a customer of that solution, who are we to get in the way of that, right? Like if they've built if the ISV, if the partner has built an integration and the customer is already a paid customer of that thing, we just want to make sure that we can meet our customers where they are, right? And I think that's at the core of like what you're seeing in enterprise software for the last like 10 years, I would say, right? Is as much as you believe that you have this monolith solution and, one that's like, the best in class, right? At the end of the day, we're now like so much of the computing is done not just on your desktop but on mobile, and now soon via agentic frameworks. All these systems need to talk to each other, right?
Yeah.
So I think going back to that first principle of like, let's make sure that we can meet our customers where they are, and also provide that value that, like, all we care about is for you to go from point A to point B in terms of what you want to design and what you want to put out into the world. And we recognize that there might be some features that we don't have ourselves that you can, and that are augmented by what our partners do, as well as, one of our biggest plays right now is to bring data from third party services into Canva as well, right? Because at the end of the day, it could be competitive intelligence, it could be sales data, it could be marketing, product metrics, right? But at the end of the day, like the reason why people come to us is because we're that presentation layer, right? That visual
Yep.
communication layer that is the heart of every business team and
So then
organization.
a smart move there is that you're bringing data to help inform people about what content they should be building. And that's when you're pulling in data from other places or helping them present that about the content that they're creating.
You're absolutely right, right? I think there's a whole upcoming wonderful like a use case, right? Like when we announced Canvas Sheets, for example, where you could, basically use a spreadsheet, like form factor to then inform and, like collect data from like third party sources and then say and create content as easy as like almost like, copying a cell and dragging it over, right? Like, and that's the thing where, my first career was in management consulting and I spent so much time in spreadsheets, right? So when I saw that happen, right, like the fact that you could generate content just based on like columns of parameters and then Canva would do the rest of it, my mind was blown, right? Because I'm like, hey, this gives like that mindset of like, being in a spreadsheet and the mental model of a spreadsheet, but into like design workflows.
That's
And that
super
to me
cool.
is such a
Yeah.
great opportunity because again, spreadsheets can be very intimidating. And we still are working our way towards making like sheets like a more actionable and friendly kind of like user interface, right? Because all of a sudden people are saying, hey, Canva, why are you doing spreadsheets? It's like, well, it's not a spreadsheet, it's more like a canvas for you to kind of do work that requires a lot of like inputs and parameters, but then we take care of like that last mile kind of production, right? So I think that's where, to your point, Rajiv, like there's metadata around the content that you have to create, right? Saying like, hey, here's my customer list, here are the formats, the channels that my campaigns build on. One is an Instagram reel, the other is like, LinkedIn post. We have all the templates for those kind of things, right? But in the old days, and even for us, like even 6 months ago, you would have to go to a LinkedIn template, pop your designs in. You'd have to go to an Instagram Reels template, pop your designs in. Now with the advent of AI and like, bulk creation that's all facilitated by our technologies, you're just only minutes away from like, going through that whole set and knocking that punch list of all those content and creative that you have to do. So yeah, so hopefully that's good news for everyone.
That is great because then you're providing more value when people are trying to do all those adaptations.
Exactly.
So how do app developers stand out on a visual first platform like Canva? So how do you tell developers and builders how to cultivate authentic stickiness beyond technical functionality? What are some like non-obvious strategies for developers to differentiate and resonate effectively? Like, you're speaking to a diverse user base, you have individual creators, you have large enterprises. So are there trends that you see around some of the top categories of these popular apps?
Yeah, I would say one of the things that we try to do for any developer who's building an app within Canva, right? So using an apps SDK is that we tell them you may have amazing innovations and like a great piece of technology, but try to abstract it in no less than like 5 steps in the user workflow, right? So if you look at most of the Canva apps, you within like 2 to 3 steps of clicks, you actually get the output from that app that you want, right? And that really comes from like our design principles that we try to like help developers frame their innovations, but in the context of like Canva's ease of use. And I think it's funny because at first, when we only had like 30 apps, at first we are like, well, should we be that have such a hard line on what those design principles are to these partners, right? Like, I mean, who are we to tell Asana how to build their app? Like,
Right.
it's such a rich functionality. But in many ways, even the feedbacks we got from the Asana all the way to some other innovators, one of my favorite partners is a partner called Crikey.ai. It's like two sisters who graduate from Stanford. They are building like an AI avatar kind of like, platform. But Canva was a great distribution framework for them, right? Because overnight they had tons of signups and activity over there. With Crikey in particular, the feedback we got was they saying, hey, your design guidelines were so crisp that we actually incorporated them into our own web and mobile app, right? Because like, they say that, hey, you must be doing something right from a design standpoint, right? In terms of
Yeah.
making things easy to use and grokkable for a first time user. And I think, there's an acronym like first time user experience, FTUI, right? Like, I think that's one of the things that we really try to inculcate in like any developer, no matter how big they are, when they're building an application with us. Now that's with apps, right? And I think so many platforms, you apps and integrations, those terms I use interchangeably. But what I just described are like apps in Canva with integrations that are powered by our APIs. I think at the end of the day, we just want to make sure that Canva's workflows can be as seamless as possible within the context of another company's apps, right? So we have recent integrations with a MailChimp, with HubSpot. There's not so much we can do to kind of tell them what the look and feel should be like,
Right.
right? But that's where our job for the APIs to be seamless, to make those things look almost like native like experiences in those third party platforms. And if fast forward to today, like our first integrations a little clucky, it was like a Canva button, there was like an iframe, like it was very clear that you were going to Canva to do something and then come back, right? Which is not a bad functionality, right? Ultimately you're still helping people make the most out of those two solutions that they love, whether it's like HubSpot on one side and Canva on the other. But fast forward to today, even the HubSpot integration is way more seamless than it has been, right? And I think that's by dint of like the APIs.
We see the same thing with our platforms that we're building.
Yeah,
If it looks like I'm taking you to a different spot, like we would do Fivetran integrations for our data visualization capabilities, right?
yeah,
So we pull data from all these different places and then force the person to go into a different user experience. Yes, it did the job, but it really sucked because
yeah. It could be
the
jarring,
person's
right?
it's
Yeah,
that first time user experience. The first time they're experiencing the product, they are using a particular interface, then they're going somewhere else, and then they're coming back. And it does the job, but really you want to refine it so that it feels like it's part of your product. So it's cool that you're talking about this, and this is really happening in real time. And that takes me to where we're going next with agentic, right? The agentic era, where
yes.
truly things are being done across multiple platforms, across multiple places, across multiple workflows. And so you've talked about that human connection will be the ultimate moat for technology companies, even for
Yes.
developers. So from your vantage point, you're the ecosystem marketing lead at Canva, Indy. How are you actively building and nurturing these deep human connections with developers and partners, particularly when many of them and many of their interactions with a platform is increasingly digital or AI mediated?
At the end of the day, I think the analogy I sometimes use, right, with my teams is that, when you fly an airline, right, like at the end of the day, the equipment is exactly the same, right? Like the job to be done is exactly the same. You're going from point A to point B. You want to go somewhere and you have a destination in mind, right? But then you probably have a favorite airline. I probably do too, right? And a part of it I have to believe is probably the customer experience you get, right? Like the feels you get, like when you're boarding the plane. It could be by virtue of your status, or it could be by virtue of like where you sit, where you're going, that kind of thing, right? So I would say at the end of the day, when you're building a platform, if you put yourself in the shoes of a developer, it's a big deal for them to make a decision being like, hey, we're going to integrate with Canva first versus integrating with this other, big design platform, right? There's not so many out there, but I will not name the ones who did not need to be named. um, but the reason I bring that up, right, and like and not to be facetious, right, is the experience, the developer experience matters deeply, right? What I've tried to do, and what I've also seen like other companies where I've been at, where we've ultimately been successful, is that if we can put our own imprint on how we transact with developers, right? Because it can't just be about the technology, right, or the fact that we're like an up and comer, or even beyond that, right? Like with 240 million actives, we're definitely a platform that a lot of the partners, if I think about some of the conversations I had with some of the biggest technology companies out there, they've come to us to build an integration, right? So obviously the play is clear, the technology is there, but I think what really differentiates you as a developer brand is that care and attention you put to a developer experience, right? So obviously the technology has to work, right? And it has to be innovative enough and easy enough where you're de-risking somebody's decision, whether they're a small developer or like a big company, to be like, hey, how much time is this going to take? How much non-recurring engineering work is it going to take, right? Like, I mean, I have a business to run. This is going to be a distraction, right? How do you assuage those concerns, right? You do it by having like easy to use frameworks, well documented APIs, and so on. That's one piece of it. So I like to think of that as like the technical enablement, right? But then I think where good platforms really earn their reputation is if you've coupled that technical enablement with commercial enablement. And so, for example, flashback to Salesforce back in 2015. Oh, sorry, in 2009, when Bobby was there. I think we overlapped by a little bit. I think actually he was part of the guard that was moving, and like I was part of like the like some of the new guard on the marketing
Yeah.
side.
Your
And
job was to take it to the next level, right?
taking that, yeah, hopefully, right?
He created the framework and you guys were there to take it to the next.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like Bobby's a legend. He launched the app exchange, and I think at that stage we needed to figure out like, okay, now we have this thing. How do we get our users to use it? How do we get our salespeople to point people to these solutions, right? Because there was a lot of like channel conflict, and there's probably a book that could be written about all this stuff, right?
Anybody that does enterprise anything is going to deal with some
Exactly.
conflict of all kinds that you have to work out.
And so going back to threading the needle on the initial question, right, is where commercial enablement comes into play is that we have to make it Sesame Street simple for partners as well as our users and our own company to see the value that comes out of this ecosystem, right? So, I think if, for example, one of the early metrics that we had at Canva was around monthly active users, right? Like, can we prove that by virtue of having some great applications and integrations that we can bump up the usage rates of specific doc types at Canva, right? So doc types at Canva. So if you think about Canva as the platform, presentations, social media, those are all our doc types. Those are all the different types of file formats, so to speak, that we support, right? So we have product managers for every doc type. And we've seen with image upscaler that like, photo editing has gone through the roof, right? We've seen with like, and hopefully with like other applications that we see, right? That apps and integrations make these individual doc types more sticky, right? So that, each of them has the potential of maybe becoming a toothbrush product in by themselves, right? Part of it's technical, but the commercial enablement piece of it goes into showing that how do we expose some of these new things early to trusted partners to say like, hey, we're going to launch this new framework that's going to put you right in like within a button, a click away from like our users, as opposed to finding the app in the left hand rail, right? And like, like activating it. This is actually going to be very much more in context of what a user is actually doing, where it's almost going to feel like a native like experience. So I think that's the other piece of it, is how do we put together the apparatus to tell these developers and engage them early, right? Like, so we have a great team of partner development managers who almost like I call it like hand-to-hand combat, right? Because they take meetings, they look at like we have like a punch list of partners we want to talk to, and we go reach out to them. Sometimes those partners go out to reach out to us directly. Sometimes we got to like knock at their door, and it doesn't matter how big or small they are. We try to have an informed view on like who are the people who would be the best candidates for these upcoming frameworks. And so that's where, even though it's ultimately to build on technology, that's the whole commercial side of things that you got to mount up as a go-to-market organization, right? Is like you got to be very judicious in terms of like reaching out to partners, and you can't have an ego there. It's not because you're bigger than this partner that they're going to build for you. Sometimes we spend some time on like some small partners that we're making big bets on, right? And then sometimes we also obviously knock at the doors of the Salesforces, the HubSpots of the world, but typically they want to talk to us as well, right? So I think I talked about technical enablement. I think commercial enablement is another piece of that. So I think in our early days of Canva, it's been around like finding ways in which we can get people interested in building on things that are going to drive monthly active users on both sides, hopefully, right? And then I think this next phase, and I think this is something where I've seen it at Salesforce, I saw it at Box, MuleSoft was obviously part and parcel of what we did, was the monetization piece, right? And I think that's where at Canva Create, we had our first partner day where, I think we hinted at what our plans are for like co-marketing and co-selling. We're still figuring out a way to do that in ways that scale, but that's obviously the next frontier, right? I think to me, a good platform rests on three pillars. One is the technology, right? You have to have the right technology that people want to build on. The second is you got to help these developers be successful, these partners be successful. And that comes with usage and growth, but it also comes with monetization. And then the last piece, and these are not in any order really, but it's really having a strong community where if you tap them on the shoulder, being like, hey, Rajiv, I would love for you to talk to me about the experiences you had building with Canva, that they will drop everything, or they'll be like, 100%. I tell me when and where, and I'll be there to be able to talk about what you're doing.
Because you don't want to be in a spot where you get someone to do something, you reach out to them, they do all this work, and then they get nothing. And you referenced that earlier, right?
Exactly.
It has to feel like a win-win. And I got to tell you, what you're doing, what you're talking about is actually really hard. I've seen so many conversations with folks where everybody wants to partner. They have really great folks that enable the partnership, but then they get you trained up, you do a bunch of work, and then they don't follow through. Right? They don't enable you to be commercially successful with it. So I think what you're talking about is really important. I want to go back. You mentioned earlier, actually, that one of the issues you had at Salesforce was orchestrating this internal sales team to say, how do I get them to buy in to App Exchange? Right?
Yeah.
And companies deal with this all the time between direct indirect, partner driven, and you're dealing with incentives, right? So think about going to that time. So beyond direct sales incentives, how do you cultivate a company-wide ecosystem muscle memory where product, engineering, customer success, and other teams instinctively understand and contribute to partner go-to-market success? Are there specific internal, you have some great frameworks you laid out. So specific go-to-market playbooks, communication rhythms, cross-functional enablement programs that are essential for this partner-first mindset?
Yeah, yeah. So I would say, like all of the above, right? And it's very hard to figure out at first, like what's the alchemy that's going to help you accomplish those goals, right? Like we tried so many things at Salesforce, right? Like we tried baskets of like tchotchkes and candy and stuff to the Salesforce being like, hey, and like, I had this colleague who put a lot of time and effort into like, creating high calorie snacks with like partner logos in them around a great idea, super sweet, like the intent was there. But salespeople in general, they're pretty conscious of appearances and that kind of stuff. And they're like, hey, I don't want to have this calorie bomb before I go work out and those kind of things, right? But I
It
think,
was good for awareness, but in the
for
end,
awareness, yeah.
it's great. Yeah, okay, I know about this partner, but that's not what I'm getting paid on.
That's not what I get paid on. Yeah, yeah. So I think, it goes back to for you to activate sales. And as trite as this sounds, right? Like it has to be about like, what's in it for me? Like what's the value for me as a salesperson to even pay attention to this partner, right? And at Salesforce, this is probably one of the things that kind of put my career on like a different trajectory, or like at least help us put ourselves more in the map on at Salesforce itself. Was we were wrestling with this. We're like, partners are bringing in money. Like, how do we let people know that this is happening, right? And how do we get people more invested? The minute you have like a rock star AE who's well respected by their peers to kind of say like, hey, this partner stuff works. You need to like really think about it. How do we do that scale? So, like I did this roadshow with our executive at the time. He was basically the executive who, came after like Bobby and others, called Ron Huddleston, who was this great gentleman who came from Oracle, just visionary. Like, we called him boy genius internally because he looked really young, but he's been around the block, and like, but he just came in with like a very strong view that it had to be about the money actually, right? Like the incentives. And unfortunately, he's passed away, but one of the things that he really helped set the course for was to really say, how do we meter and measure and showcase the value of of this ecosystem by the numbers, right? And so one of the things that he and I brainstormed, this is going to date us, but if you remember when Salesforce Chatter launched, right? Like
Right.
social media within your CRM,
It
right?
was
Small things
everywhere.
are
I
falling
remember.
down.
I remember going to Dreamforce, and it was just everywhere. And I'm like, what? Chatter?
Yeah, yeah. It was
Yeah.
we even had a Super
It was
Bowl
the second
commercial.
coming. I remember.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. So just to land the plane on this story is basically we knew that this was like circa 2010, 2011. Chatter was a thing internally, right? And we're like, hey, well, what do people follow on Chatter? Well, they're not just following people, they're following accounts and opportunities, right? What if we could use Chatter as a mechanism to kind of communicate that when a partner landed a deal in a AE's kind of like account, that whether the AE was involved or not, if that deal landed, that AE would get compensated on it. So that was the model that we created. Like I helped create that model with Ron around like what that percentage compensation plan was and those kind of things.
Right.
But the way we communicated it was something that, I worked with our marketing ops team, was like twice a week we had to have a list of all the deals that came in through partners. And then I manually went in and like tagged that AE and said, hey, Cha-Ching, right? Because it was like chatter, right? So cha, and then ching is just, money, right? So I
Yeah.
even came up with I had this designer, Stephen Geraldo, who created this very Salesforce-esque kind of logo with Cha-Ching written on it. And, so you got the visual, then you had like a really pithy sentence being like, hey, because Job Science sold 40 seats, you just got paid, right? And then click here for more details. And then I created like a 2-slide deck that could again be previewed in the Salesforce Chatter format, right? So this is early social media marketing for an
That's right.
internal social media platform within
The
Salesforce,
original.
right?
It's kind of the
Like,
original emoji.
yeah, it kind of was. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah. And then what I did is at the very early days, I tagged Ron, and then I tagged our other executive, Mike Rosenbaum, right, who was like our head of like platform at the time. And I kid you not, within a week and a half, they both asked me, being like, hey, this is going great because everybody's taking notice. Like Benioff, within like 5 days, like Mark Benioff, our CEO, was like, what is this? Like, who did this? Like, and is this real? Like, people are really getting paid. And because we knew that, like, especially once like an AE, especially ones that was respected by their peers, they're being followed by all the people that are under them, that look up to them, right? The minute they saw that, we what I love about the story is that we turned a reporting requirement into a viral effect company wide, right? And
Yeah.
within a week and a half, everybody knew that they could make money with partners. Our partners were ecstatic because all of a sudden they were like, holy shit, this AE that I never talked to is now calling me being like, how do I get my cha-ching, and that kind of thing. And so cha-ching actually became a verb at Salesforce. And, I know the business has probably changed a lot. I don't even know if we still have that internal kind of moniker, but overnight, like, and I was so thrilled to see this is because like we had this guy, our marketing ops guy, Shay Casey, like very taciturn, kind of typical marketing ops person.
Yeah.
Like he would just kind of crank through the numbers and give me the data that I would put in cha-ching on the feeds. But overnight, like, AEs would buy him drinks and like, send him stuff, be like, Shay, give me the cha-ching, that kind of thing. So fast forward to today, there's so many other ways in which you can communicate and disseminate information in your organization, right? Like Slack and so on, right?
So yeah, so that's a great example. So how would you would take that from what you did at Salesforce? How would you do that today? Because I'm assuming that at Canva you have enterprise salespeople too, right? And you have
Yeah.
these folks that you're more than PLG. You're doing multiple levels, right, of sales and marketing. So can you take that to something you're doing today to drive that ecosystem? Because you basically have enabled the building of this.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's still early days, like I said, like on the monetization front, right? But I think where we're already seeing, and without going into too much details, where we're already seeing some traction and some nods to what partners can bring to the table is the fact that, a lot of our larger enterprise deals now are coming in because APIs are a fundamental selling point, right? The fact that we can integrate with like either like a built-in solution or a set of integrations that the customer wanted, being like, hey, we really are interested, but you have to work with this or you have to work with that. Or actually, another piece of it is also helping them build like a custom application using APIs that then basically takes a 5-step workflow and turns it into like a button that they have that they can disseminate like to their teams, right? So one big use case, and we've documented this publicly so I can share it, is in real estate, right? If you think about any use case where we're seeing some traction is, and where people are building custom integrations and apps and workflows is whenever you have a use case where you have a high frequency, high velocity need for like content assets, right? So in real estate, think of it like a flyer, right? You have a property, you have a
Yeah, it
listing,
comes right out of your
right?
Matterport. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, and that's honestly something that I would have loved to have at Matterport as well as at WeWork, honestly, right? But where I'm going with this is that that's something where, slowly but surely we've knocked out like and gotten deals at some of the biggest commercial real estate companies out there, right? Because they're saying, holy shit, like, with this integration, like, we know that we work in a very specific way, but that Canva is interoperable enough where you can talk to the systems that we work with so that we can then like, kind of create these workflows and help our teams self-serve to generate assets like the creation of like hyper personalized content at scale, right? Is where it can enable any like real estate agent at like Engel and Volkers, for example, to kind of say like, hey, I have these 5 properties that are like, AAA kind of properties in this kind of market. And I wanted to start marketing this, right? Like before they had to work with the internal marketing department and kind of wait their
Create the
turn in the queue,
listing, do all these
right?
things. Yeah, yeah.
And now they can do it themselves in Canva, right? Because they know how to use Canva or they will learn how to use it fairly quickly, right?
Yeah.
But
It
at the
takes
touch of
no
a
time to
button,
learn.
like they have like all this on-brand stuff because at the end of the day, it's like we have the ability for companies to via brand kits to generate templates that are always going to be on brand, right? But then it's only the information that changes, right? It's the pictures, the 5 pictures of the property, it's the price of the property, it's the location, it's the little headshot of the real estate agent that you pop in on the bottom right? Those are all things where you can now do that at a touch of a button. That's when we know that we're punching at our above our weight in terms of like contributing to the success of like sales, right? Is like in the last 3 months, especially a non-negligible amount of like, sales wide kind of Slack posts of like wins, right? In the win library, right? So it's almost like Cha-Ching because this is before, like we didn't have like a win channel, like back then there was no Slack,
Yeah.
but now you could imagine that there's going to be references to what partners and ecosystem is bringing to the table on a fairly regular basis, right? So it's not quite as like guerrilla marketing as like Cha-Ching was.
Well, yeah, but you're talking about it, right? Yeah, you're making it technically straightforward. You're providing commercial level of success, and then there's a
Yes.
community aspect, and it's highlighted by the marketing around it, right? So it's all come. It helps bring all that together. All right, this has been awesome. So now I'm going to take you to the Spark Tank. So today, we're thrilled to have Indy Sen join us, a marketing mastermind who spent 20 years building platforms at places like Salesforce, Google, Box, MuleSoft, and now Canva. Indy, your career reads like a superhero origin story. from the ground floor of Salesforce's App Exchange, basically the bat cave of B2B programs, to now Canva, where you're democratizing design faster than Bruce Wayne burns through sports cars. You're proof that great marketing isn't about having superpowers. It's about making everyone else feel like they do. So today we're putting you through the ultimate Batman trivia challenge. Here's how it works.
All right.
I'm going to hit you with a Batman trivia questions ranging from the obvious to the wholly obscure comic book reference Batman.
Okay.
No Googling, no calling your inner Robin for help, just pure Dark Knight devotion. So, Indy, are you ready to prove you are the Batman trivia champion that Gotham needs?
It's not who I am underneath, but what I do that defines me. Let's do it.
Ah, that's so good. All right. Great way to start it. All right. Here's question number 1. In which comic book did Batman make his first appearance? A, Action Comics number 1. B, Detective Comics number 27. C, Batman number 1. So in which comic book did Batman make his first appearance?
The answer is B, Detective Comics.
You're absolutely sure about this?
Ooh, I am, because action number 1 is Superman, if I'm not mistaken, and then there was no Batman comic before Batman's introduction, so
Dude, you
I'll
nailed
stick
it.
with it.
That was
Yeah.
awesome.
Okay. All right.
I love it. This was great. You're right. Batman debuted in Detective Comics number 27 in 1939-12. I'm assuming that means 1939.
Ah, nice. Yeah.
All right. I love that. You were so confident about this. It's great. Okay. In 1978 comic Batman 295, Batman faces a villain who uses a rather unconventional weapon, a giant mechanical version of which household item? Here we go. A, toaster. B, vacuum cleaner. C, typewriter.
C, typewriter.
Oh, that's good. Dude, you got it again. They used a giant mechanical typewriter as part of an elaborate death trap. It's a classic. Yeah, it's a classic example of the era's outlandish version of storytelling. So
yeah, and I'll just add that since then, that typewriter by many writers has been featured in the Batcave in like Batman's trophy case. So whatever death trap he escaped, he ended up probably Robin helped him, move it to the Batcave. But yeah, maybe Alfred probably also.
So it's now in his Batcave. There we go.
That's
how you knew.
Yeah.
That's why you knew the answer. This is awesome. Here's the third one. Which of these 3 Batman villains was originally introduced in the 1960s TV series before appearing in comics? So it appeared in the TV series, then it came to the comics. A, Egghead. B, King Tut. C, Calendar Man.
That's a tough one. I'm gonna go with King Tut just because I remember him in the series, and I was like, this is kind of crazy, but let's go with it. So yeah, let's go with King Tut.
Yeah. So my team says, I thought we'd have you on this, but apparently no, you got it right. King Tut is the answer.
Yes.
King Tut was created for the show and later adapted into comic continuity. Here we go. So Egghead was created for the TV show, but did not transition to comics until much later and less prominently. And then Calendar Man originated in the comics, but not the TV show.
Right. Yeah. I think Calendar Man, if I'm not mistaken, is a later era villain. Julian Day is his name. So yes, yeah.
You are blowing it away. Okay, you're 3 for 3. Usually we stop at 3 because you won't get it all right. But I have 2 more if you want to go. Keep going.
All right, I can do this all day. That's a Captain America quote, but let's go with it.
All right, in the animated series Batman Beyond, what is the name of the gang that idolizes the Joker? Do I even need to give you choices for this?
I want to say it's just the Jokers, right? With a Z maybe, but I'm not sure.
That's it.
Maybe we'll go.
Dude, you nailed it.
Okay.
That's it. Okay, I didn't even need to give you that other 2. B was jokesters and C clowns. It was jokers with a Z. Exactly.
Jokers with a Z. Yes. It's so 90s. I love it. The Jokers.
Oh God, it's like very boy bandish. Okay, now here's the last one. In the 1960s comics, Batman and Robin once encountered a villain whose criminal theme was based on which of the following competitive activities? A, chess. B, stamp collecting. C, kite flying.
You
So
might be stumping me
a
here.
villain, this
Yeah.
1960s comic, encountered a villain whose criminal theme was based on which of the following competitive activity? So A, chess, B, stamp collecting, and C, kite flying.
Wow. I'm trying to visualize how stamp collecting would be a threat to Batman and Robin. I'm gonna go with kite flying just because there is a villain called Kite Man, but I don't know. So yeah, let's go with the kite flying.
Oh, this is ridiculous. So you're right again, Indy. Um,
Yes, actually
even
my
on a
lottery ticket today.
pure shit luck guess, you get it right. So today's your day, as my dad would say, go buy a lottery ticket.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
because you got
I'm gonna go
5 out of 5.
right now.
Okay, so chess has been used as a motif by several villains like chessmen in other comics, but not in this particular Batman story. B, stamp collecting is a real golden age plot. Superman fought a stamp obsessed villain, but not Batman.
Ah, okay.
And C, you totally nailed it. Batman and Robin battled the Kite Man, a villain whose crimes involved kites long before he became a cult favorite in modern comics. So
He is a cult. Yeah, so he came back in like the Tom King series, like this is probably like 5, 6 years ago, and his catchphrase is just "Kite Man, oh yeah!" And then he always typically he does that when he attacks Batman, and he typically just gets punched in the face, and then he's out. But I guess people like that, so he'll probably come to some movie or series adaptation soon. But
that's
that's Kite
ridiculous.
Man.
Okay, so my first question after this is what made you such a Batman fanatic?
So I would say this is probably in 1989. I remember seeing the Tim Burton Keaton movie in the theaters, and my mind was just blown. So like I think it's also coincided. Like if you think about movies, so I love movies, and
I
right,
am
and like
Batman.
and that yeah, exactly. So I think like that was kind of lives rent free in my head. But like I think the reason why I just for some reason I just gravitated towards is because two things. I would say one is I've always been a Prince fan, so the soundtrack, the fact that he was across it was just I was like, this is fucking awesome.
Yeah.
And still to this day, a really good Prince album, right? Like people don't think of it that way, but it's just amazing. And then I think the second thing was the car. That car just blew the Batmobile,
That
like
was
the
awesome.
'89
Yeah.
Batmobile. So freaking cool. So today I'm actually speaking in my basement, like because I'm being naughty, but no, I'm just kidding. My home office
Your
is
wife
actually
kicked you to the basement.
yeah, she's like, stop reading so much Batman comic books and actually go do some work. No, we have a guest, and my office doubles as the guest room. But if we were to speak in my office, you would see a Lego version of the 1989 Batmobile because that's probably if I could wave a magic wand and say like this would be my dream car, that would be it. So I
Wow.
think between that and then this is Jack Nicholson, Kim Basinger, like
Oh,
uh,
that was
Michael
genius.
Keaton.
Yeah, it
It
doesn't get
was
much better
it
than
was
that. Yeah.
Apex Mountain for like what a cool summer movie should be, right? And I think I'm old enough to remember Batmania. So yeah, yeah.
So you got obsessed from that point. So you were probably what, like 11, 11, 12?
Good guess. It was the summer of '89, so I think I was 11. Yeah.
There we
Very,
go.
very impressionable age, right? Like
Yeah, it's a perfect age to get into it. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So let's get back to work.
Yes.
You've talked passionately in the past about watching Steve Jobs keynote when Apple was launching the iPhone
Yeah.
as the moment you knew you wanted to work in technology because it brought together your love of storytelling with technology. Tell us
Yeah.
more about it. Can you bring that moment to life?
Yeah, yeah. I think for me, like I do remember, and as cliche as it sounds, I do remember where I was when I saw it. Like I was still living in Boston. I was about to start business school, right? Because this was 2007. Like the world felt like your oyster. You're like, oh, I'm investing in myself. Like, what am I going to do? Like what's the type of like? There's so much you can do now. Like potentially with like this degree in your hands. But as I was about to go in, I think I had it like I had a Mac Mini at the time that I had connected to my TV. So this is how much of a nerd I was. I found a very contrived way to kind of like watch the keynote like on my big screen TV, which at
That's
the end
cool.
back then was like a 30-inch TV, that kind of thing, but still pretty big. I was very proud of that TV purchase. So anyway, long story short, like so I watched the WWDC. Oh no, it was an Apple special event, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So I remember where I was. I was sitting on like this futon couch that I had in my part of my bachelor days in Boston, and I just saw this and like there was so much rumors, right? And I was already an early kind of like I was a PC user my whole life until then, but I got the iPod and I was like, this thing is so cool, right? Like and I was very much in the market for what the next iPod will be. The rumors is there was going to be a video iPod, and this was before like the early like 5G bandwidth and all that stuff, right? But I had a lot of like movies that I could download and I'd rip from my DVDs, those kind of things. So I was in the market for that. So I remember kind of sitting down and like, watching it. And I just see this, Steve Jobs had this legendary way of kind of going about presenting things. And I was like, so one, I just wanted to see it because I was like, it's always going to be a show. But then he did this really like very clever thing where he's like, today we're going to announce, three things, right? So I'm like, oh, here we go, Minto principle, like let's go,
Gotta have your three, yeah.
and right, exactly. And he's like, we're going to announce a video iPod. We're going to announce like a breakthrough communication device. And then what was the third thing? I'm trying to remember now. A new portable video player or something like that, right? And then he's like, do you get it? Like this, and that. A portable video player, a breakthrough communication device, a video iPod, right? And then he's like, these things are all the same thing, right? Like it's the iPhone. And just the way he went about it, right? Like talking about why they decided to build this thing that if they had just listened to market analysts, they would have done would have been a widescreen video iPod, right? But they decided to kind of converge all those technologies. And I think what I really loved about that story was the fact that he kind of led you through the way, like the technical insight for them, being like, hey, look, there's a reason why we wanted to do it without any buttons, right? It's because your finger is the ultimate pointing device, right? We've done our research. Here's what the market has right now. Like all of these things are very good at one thing, but not good at everything, right? And like they're either a great phone or they're a great email device, but they suck. They can't do both. And I think he kind of just threaded the needle from a storytelling perspective, right? Like that pulled that red thread, being like, look, this is why we built this thing the way it was. And I think it wasn't just what he announced, right? Because I was already like, wow, when can I get my hands on this, right? But it was how they did it, right? And I think for me, blending that art of storytelling, even the showmanship that Steve Jobs was so famous for, right? Like, people just eating out of his hands, right?
Yeah,
Like when
yeah.
he announced that thing I was just like, I don't know what job that is, right? Like and then not the Steve Jobs jobs, right? Like I knew what job that was, but it was who helped him put that story together, right? And even like announce this with so much theatrics, right? And like cleverness and like kind of storytelling and what taking you to the hand so that like the end result was like, I think everybody there afterwards was and was like, I have to get this device. Like this thing is going to be like the greatest thing literally since sliced bread. And just that storytelling, the way of like identifying this unmet need and showing how with this device, you can not just meet those three unmet needs, but you can meet all of them and more by virtue of like, using this device. I thought that was just masterful, right? And I think I was like, it's storytelling, it's showmanship. These are things that I kind of gravitate towards, I geek out on. And then it was also amazing technology at that time, right? The fact that, touchscreen, I remember, I don't know if you saw, like, there's definitely a great plane movie, but the BlackBerry movie, right? Like when BlackBerry
That's right.
executives
Yep.
saw that announcement, like in the movie, they do it really well, but they were like, we are so effed,
Oh, we're
right?
so screwed. Yeah, yeah.
So that for me was like, I was like, hey, let me cater my business school experience to figure out as much as I can, like what do I need to know to get a job that helps me tell those stories, right? And I didn't know it then, but it was product marketing, which obviously Apple is super famous for as well. But that's what got me into my current career, I think.
That's beautiful. I appreciate the story and how it really captured the moment. So, and I think one of the other amazing aspects of it that we talk about the product so much, but it was also the ecosystem. This was the app store.
Yes.
This was the ability for people to innovate using the capabilities of the iPhone. Now, other firms had that, like in the Nokia, there's Brew and some other operating systems where you could build apps, but it was a nightmarish process and you had to fight to get on deck. Whereas Apple created a way to create a whole app ecosystem. Is that part of what got you to, or
Yeah.
maybe that was
So,
later?
so I think that was later because if memory serves right, the iPhone SDK, right, and the whole third-party ecosystem, that I think came a little bit after. So I think that actually came at WWDC, right? Like, because initially when they launched it, it was just portrait. It's a phone. It has built-in apps that you're gonna love, like that we've built ourselves, our own first-party apps, and it has all the content that you want from like an iPod and that kind of stuff. So I think that first started off as almost like a walled garden, right? And I think having read some books about and just some articles about that launch, it sounds like later on, I think Steve Jobs himself had to be convinced that they needed to open it up to third-party developers to kind of launch the ecosystem. So I think they had an SDK in the wings, but it sounds like
But it wasn't there.
but it
Yeah,
wasn't
yeah.
at
But
launch.
obviously
Yeah,
they built it as a platform and they've been able to take it from there.
yeah.
So now let's talk about you as a leader. So Indy, you've been described as a Zen leader who balances flawless strategic thinking with the dynamic ability to navigate ambiguity with compassion, joy, and enthusiasm. It's very
That's
kind.
very kind.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
How do you, as a Zen leader, approach decision making and team motivation with the urgency required for the rapid scaling and continuous innovation that's occurring at Canva today?
Yeah, I think over time, I would say, I think I've learned not to take things personally, right? Like I think that, business is business, right? And I think at the end of the day, especially as I've grown into the shoes of like a leader, it's like it's all about enabling the team. At the end of the day, that's your job. In Hinduism, you have like, Ganesh, who's like the remover of obstacles, right? I think that in management, your job as a leader is to make sure that you can lead your teams with clarity, right? Like give them the right direction, give them clear direction on like what the goals are, the stakes of like everything that needs to be done. But then try to remove obstacles, because if you've done your job right as a leader, you either are surrounded by great people or you've recruited those people yourself, right? And you want them to be successful. You've brought them in for a reason, right? And I think, as my kids would say, right, like let people cook, right? Like, like let people do what they've come to do. And I think your job as a leader, especially as you start building greater and greater teams where you're a little bit more removed from the action, right? And I think at Canva, we're a startup. So I am knee deep in like my IC work. I'm also like helping steer like, some
Yeah,
of my
just a small multi-billion-dollar
yeah,
startup,
yeah,
but
yeah.
you're
But we're
but
ecosystem.
you're in a start you're in a startup as
Exactly.
part of a large,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So so the struggle is quote unquote real in terms of like advocating for resources, setting the tone, that clarity, right? And I think so in my mind, what it really boils down to is, can you like lead with clarity, right? And I think, sometimes you don't get that clarity because maybe that clarity does not exist, right? In terms of what our goals are, what our priorities are, right? How do you put your best foot forward to try and fight for that clarity, or at least deal with ambiguity, right? Because I think what I've learned over time, and this is applicable both at Canva, but also like many places I've been, and I'm sure Rajiv, like this will resonate, is I think ambiguity is okay. I think indecision is not. And so I think ambiguity, I think your job as a leader is to help your team navigate that ambiguity, give them alternatives or ask them for alternatives, and kind of then with your mind of like, or your knowledge of like where the business is going, try to like help arrive at a decision. But I think it's indecision that I think is just fraught with like peril, right? Because I think to me, like indecision is the cancer. Your job as a leader is to help your team make a decision. And I think you may not have all the right information, but if your team, like no matter how experienced they are, see that you're not making up your mind, or you're kind of like going back and forth and having endless meetings about a decision that needs to be made, you're going to lose trust, right? I had this great executive at Google called Carol Carpenter, who was like our head of product marketing at the time. And I think she rightfully kind of brought this model being like, look, I think as a cross-functional leader, and which product marketing is, I think you have to do your best to make sure that you're operating at a level where you can, because of that vantage point, do what you can to enable trust, right? Like create trust builders and minimize trust busters, right? And I think to me, indecision is the ultimate trust buster, because no matter how smart you are, or no matter how big your team is, or if anybody starts getting an inkling that you do not know what you're doing, or those kind of things, I think that's an automatic trust buster, right? And it's not on you. It's just more like, how do you make sure that people are informed in real time of like decisions that need to be made, the obstacles that might be in the way, and sometimes it may not be in your purview or your ability to set that clarity, but at the very least, advocate for it.
Yeah, and I like that because you put it together with trust building, helping your folks make decisions. So you're not saying, "Hey, bring everything to me. I'm going to make the decision." So a Zen leader doesn't have to make all the decisions, but creates an environment to enable decision making.
Exactly.
And I think one of the things you've talked about too is the notion of psychological safety,
Yes.
right? So, and we've had this with Udi Ledogor,
Yeah.
right? Right? Of Gong, right? So he'll talk about, how do I help my folks take big risks by offering them the ability to create an environment where they can take those risks and speak out of turn and take big swings. Yeah. And so you talk about that as well, right? How do you innovate unless you create that notion of psychological safety where you open yourself up to radical candor or constructive dissent?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I can think of many examples, right? But I think there's one in particular is like, I remember at my time at WeWork, things happen very quickly at WeWork, as both the good things and the bad things.
Everything
as has
happened
been
at high
documented.
speed.
But, like the talent density at that company was insane, right? Like when I left Google to go to WeWork, there was a form leaving Google where I had to pick a drop list of like companies I was going to, right? And there's, the usual, Amazon's, Facebook, that kind of stuff. But at the very bottom, WeWork actually made that list because at the time, WeWork was just hiring like great talent left and right. Now, where I'm going with the story is that at one point, I joined in to lead technical product marketing, and then very quickly the leadership team determined that we needed to kind of build out global product marketing, not just for technology, but also like actually our physical properties and everything that we did there. And so overnight, I ended up like inheriting a bunch of folks who were almost like who were product marketers in name, but really brand managers for like WeWork. And there was this really talented woman by the name of Julia who was, had been at WeWork for a couple of years, but was kind of struggling because she just saw like indecision everywhere, right? And she had big ideas, right? And she was not really that junior, but she was experienced and she was motivated. And I saw that in her. But then at the same time, some people said that, quote unquote, she might have been like, hard to work with or those kind of things. But it's just because she was wrestling with the fact that she was not empowered to do things. I had my first meeting with her. She was one of my directs. And, she told me what her desires were. And she's like, hey, honestly, I want to do things because I want to have an impact and I want to get promoted. And I was like, that's interesting. Like I've just met you. So that's not a conversation we can have today. Like, I don't know enough or like, but let's put you on something that you can, sink your teeth into. And very quickly she rose to the occasion, right? Like we gave her like at the time what was called AAA property marketing. So these were like, the big skyscrapers in New York where WeWork had all of a sudden like, 8, 10, 12 floors at least on those where we know that those things would be super desirable, but they had needed to move fast and they were big whales, so to speak, in our inventory. And she just availed herself of that because she had the right relationships. In many ways, she made myself and our CMO look great because she just sunk her teeth into it and did not relent, right? And so what I was really happy was like within like 4 or 5 months, our CMO like did a marketing all hands and recognized her like in front of everybody and actually brought her up to stage and be like, hey, this is the type of determination and just ideas. Like great ideas can come from anywhere, but let's make sure that you all feel empowered to do the best work of your lives, right? And I think that to
That's
me
really
was like
awesome.
it was like
Yeah.
an early
Yeah.
lesson in like how do you help people get to their highest point of contribution, right? And I think like I would say it's on employees or even myself, right? I report to someone. It's my job to tell somebody if I don't feel I'm working towards my highest point of contribution. And it's also my job and my employee's job to tell me or for me to tell my manager, these are the things I want to do, I believe I can do, and where you'll get the most bang out of your buck for out of me, so to speak. But I do think it's a manager's responsibility to know when somebody's clearly punching below their weight. I call that the lowest point of contribution, right? If, especially younger employees might just do that because they're asked to do it and they're like, hey, like, I mean, this is not a great job environment. I just do what I'm doing, right? But it sucks to have somebody really talented do just stuff that literally will literally be replaced by AI at some point, right? Like market
Yeah.
research, even some messaging, right? Like you can get 80% of the way there with messaging by providing like a template for the frameworks and saying, hey, look at this website and tell me what the messaging tree would be for the hierarchy would be for this. AI can, I did it a couple of weeks ago, like Claude, OpenAI, they'll get you 80% of the way there. And then of course, that's where you keep as a human in the loop, you produce that output. So I would say, to me, it's really a manager's job. And I think maybe this is part of the Zen leadership thing is like create that environment where it's very clear that everybody can be working towards their highest point of contribution. Because otherwise, what's the point of hiring great people in this job environment, especially? There's so much talent out there. AI is not going to replace that talent, but it's going to help them be even better, right? And help you get things more done faster. So I think the key to that is really making sure that people are motivated, right, to do the best work of their lives. And I think for me, that's like a early kind of like management lesson I had, especially at that stage when I had this ability to kind of like steer a sizable team. All these people were great. Like some of them, I have no doubt that some people were smarter, no doubt younger, but
But I mean, but that is great
yeah,
leadership is you don't have to be the smartest
no,
person in the room, but you have to recognize how you can get the best out of people. And part of that is psychological
exactly.
safety and taking that employee that you had who had a great idea and enabling her to get it
Yeah,
out, right? And at the same time, though, I'd say that part of also what you're doing is that I think you've talked about this too, is that Steve Jobs will say focus is not saying yes,
like
it's
no,
saying no to really
yes,
good
yes.
ideas. So you have this really tough balancing act, right? Where you're saying, I have a whole bunch of great ideas. I want to foster those great ideas, offer people the psychological safety of that. But you also have to say no to random acts of marketing.
Random acts of marketing.
So
Yes, exactly.
you're thinking about servant leadership at its core. You're thinking about enabling courage. How do you balance those?
Yeah, yeah. And I think it goes back in my mind to, and this is not always easy because sometimes you yourself as a leader are so like submerged in all this busyness, right? Like with the why, is that you have to kind of every now and then pick your head up and kind of see like, hey, are we all working on the highest impact work that we can, right? Or are we just doing things because we've done it before, right? And I think, I'm seeing this at Canva and I've seen this at other companies too, right? When you're in hypergrowth mode, especially as a company, is it's very clear that what you've done 6 months ago may not be what you need to do to get to the next level, right? Like what got you here is not what's going to get you there. So there's this perpetual exercise of kind of like, maybe reinventing yourself, or as the business then all of a sudden has more channels, right? Instead of having one developer event, can you then have like piggyback on like your field marketing and just invite developers to those events as opposed to having like a proper standalone developer conference? It's still early. We're still trying to figure out like what are ways in which we can target developers. But one of the signals I got at like Canva Create was that for the first time, we actually invited developers to kind of showcase their wares on the floor, right? Like, table stakes for many large conferences, but this was the first time actually inviting partners and having them sponsor. And it probably got the second most foot traffic. I saw the metrics, right? The second most foot traffic across the whole conference, outside of like, our main activation points for like the new product announcements that we had. And nobody expected that, but people like, who were MailChimp customers were walking around Canva Create and they see MailChimp and they're like, I did not know you had an integration with Canva. Like, tell me more. And MailChimp was super happy because that's more people who are happy and probably more likely to stay activated on MailChimp because now that they know that it integrates with Canva. So you need to think about that type of thing very opportunistically, being like, just because something worked for us in the past is not necessarily going to like, work for us in the future, right? Or maybe there that bigger bets that we can make across new channels that let us do the job we need to get done, but knock it out in a way that's going to like set us up for success for the next like couple of operating quarters, right? And I would love to say years, but the truth is that nobody knows where they're going to be like 6 months from now and that kind of thing, or where the business is going to take us. But I think your job as a leader, in my mind, especially in marketing, and it's not because marketing is necessarily easier to kind of like course correct, but if you think about engineering, tech debt, and that kind of stuff, there's some things that are going to take literally months to change, right? With marketing, if you're not oversubscribed in certain activities, it's pretty easy to kind of navigate new channels, right? Or at least try new things in established channels and then experiment with others, right? You can mount a campaign, especially hopefully with Canva, right? Like you can do a campaign in like, months of work in like, weeks, if not days. In my mind, marketing is the quintessential like situational leader, right? Like I think you have your finger on so many of the pulses, right? You work product marketing, especially. You work with product, you work with sales, you work with marketing. If you're a senior leader, you're kind of plugged into what the business cares about. And you can kind of like think about like, hey, what if we were to do this, right? Instead of like, why are we doing this? Like, what if we were to do that? I think it's really about like trying to lead with like ideas on the table. And then also don't think that the responsibility is for you to have all the ideas. Keep your nose to the ground, right? Like listen to either people on your team, or I would say as a product marketing leader, and this is a directive I've given to teams that I've personally led, is spend more time with customers, right? As a product marketer, yes, you do have to spend a lot of time with product, clearly. But at the end of the day, if your product team is not spending time with customers, be that person to get channel some of those asks and stress test what you're building and those kind of things. So I would say sometimes customers can not only give you like some good ideas, but also messaging, right? What I really love about building ecosystems is that their success is going to be your success, right? So if you do your job right, if you enable them technically, if you enable them commercially, like the minute you have, and we saw this at Salesforce, I saw this at Box, MuleSoft, God knows, like when people kind of took off like with their solutions, that was the bread and butter of the business.
I mean, yeah, MuleSoft is ultimately all about connecting systems
exactly
together.
right.
It was basically partnership as a product. Right?
So, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. It was integration as a service, partnership as a product, because no one company would use MuleSoft the same way. But when they did, it was like, one, it was sticky as F, right?
It was magic.
And then two, it really created like magical experiences for these companies, right? Like where it was literally creating a process out of their secret sauce was what most companies that were really successful in MuleSoft were able to do. So I think leadership to me, it's all about creating that clarity, enabling the people, making sure that everyone's operating at the highest point of contribution, and then also keeping your nose to the ground to being like, hey, what are the things where not just in my own vantage point, my metrics, the things that I have to hit, what are ways in which I can help, especially at startups, right? What is that point of view I can inject to kind of help people really seize the opportunity that we have? And especially with ecosystem, like, I think we talked earlier about APIs as self-serve business development. But I really think like if I look at Salesforce's 10Ks today, those kind of things, right? Every quarter, like, platform, there was one point like maybe 2 years ago, where platform was the biggest piece of Salesforce's business. I don't know if that's still the case, but they keep on changing their platform name. So I don't even know what the latest, greatest name is, but like Salesforce One or the Salesforce platform, right?
In a way, what they're doing now with Agentforce is
yes, that's right,
that,
of course,
right?
Yeah.
It's putting together what they did with App Exchange and all the different application environments they were building. Agentforce now brings all those elements together along with outside
that's
applications.
Exactly right.
So it really is truly binding them together with so many other
Yeah.
capabilities. So you're right. I mean, there's this providing safety, you're enabling folks, you're helping them to shine, enabling them to have metrics so they can make better decisions about what to keep and what to drop. And you're really propelling it forward.
Yeah.
So very cool way of describing this. So let's talk. I have a few quick things to throw at you. So we're going to do quick Q&A. Things about you. Okay. What's something you're currently learning or trying to get better at that has nothing to do with advancing your career?
Ooh, great question.
Beyond reading Batman comics.
Yes, yes. There's only so much of a big market for people who can nail Batman trivia, right? I would say, so I'm a runner. I think you mentioned you also ran marathons. I think one of the things that I do is that I've enjoyed what running has brought to my life. It's brought me a lot of perspective. Like as a parent, you probably know, like four kids, right? Like I have two. They're younger, but like they still take a lot of time. And for me, running is my outlet, right? It's almost like moving meditation. As I get older, obviously everything hurts more. It takes more work to do what we want to do, but I'm trying to just take care of my health, like more stretching, more flexibility. So I want to stay in the running game, but I recognize that it's going to be more work than it has been in the past.
Yeah, I hope you do, because I had to give up long distance running. But I will say it was a great, my wife was not going to get angry at me about leaving to go run 12 miles.
Yes.
So she was, if I was going out to to walk the beach
or play golf
go
with
out
like
and play
beers with
golf,
buddies. Yeah, exactly.
she'd be really annoyed. But, she's like, you're going to put yourself in pain for the next 2 hours to run 12 miles.
Go for it. Yeah, yeah. So for me, I think what I want to get better at, just because, so I do have a bucket list, is I think in the marathon circuit, there's this six marathons that I call the majors, right? So it's Boston, Tokyo, London, Berlin, New York, and now Sydney's now the seventh, but that's a little crazy. So I've done 4 out of 6 so far. So the only ones I have left are Boston and Tokyo. So ideally, I would like by the age of 50 to have been able to run like all 6 of them. If it goes a little beyond 50, like that's fine. The later the better, because that just means I'll stay on top of my running game. But yeah, I would say that that's probably a personal pursuit.
Yeah, I think it's an awesome way of doing it.
Yeah.
And it's like you set a goal and keeping your body in shape as part of it. You can run forever. I probably could have too, had I taken care of myself a little bit differently as part of doing this, stretching
Yeah.
more yoga, all that.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I hope you
so
can still go
definitely,
on like the occasional run or like just shorter runs, right? Or
I can do short
yeah,
runs and I can do a lot of hiking.
yeah,
So there's
that's awesome.
that. What's a historical event or person or movement that inspires you? You mentioned Steve Jobs. Is there someone in particular about that movement or event that lights you up?
Yeah, so I think we talked about Steve Jobs quite a bit. And I feel like any movement that's had some staying power to me is the definition of a movement, right? Like, so it could be a cultural movement, a political movement, those kind of things, right? Like something where you created something where people are, still talking about it to this day. Like I think as a marketer, I have a fascination. So I'm a sneakerhead also, which maybe that's actually my midlife crisis, other than reading Batman comics, is and keep on reading them, is collecting sneakers. But I remember, and again, maybe this is the impressionable age of like 11 or so, like 1989, right? When Nike came up with just like Nike Air as like a campaign, as a piece of technology. They had like air in their shoes, and many other companies did too. But that was the first time where they exposed the air through like that window, right? And there's this designer called Tinker Hatfield, who's just like a legendary kind of like sneaker designer. He designed most of the first Air Maxes. So the Air Max 1 was the first one that exposed that bubble. And as a kid, like I liked sneakers, but I saw that as like every kid in our schoolyard was like, and especially in France, like Nikes were way more expensive. So some kids had Nikes, and then the rich kids had Nike Airs. It took me a while to be that kid who had a Nike Air, but I really, it lived rent free in my head. But what I like about that is that still to this age, and this goes back to the movements creating staying power. And maybe it's not a movement, it's more like a campaign or a brand coup, if you will, right? But Gen Z, right? They're still wearing Jordans, they're wearing like Air Maxes. Those things are timeless, right? And I think to me, anytime you can create, like for marketing especially, everybody looks at like Nike as like, masters in marketing. Like, I think
They're the
I ran
best.
the
Yeah.
London Marathon, right? Like New Balance was the sponsor, and New Balance had great creative, but Nike, they were just like, okay, we didn't win the sponsorship, but we're going to plaster the fuck out of London with like, like some great creative that inspires people and reminds them that, and actually
Yeah.
Nike started as like a running.
Brilliant guerrilla marketing.
Yeah. And I think you probably saw some billboards. Like the only time I stopped during that race was to take a picture of the billboard. And I was like, this is so freaking cool, like, and then I kept on because I was like, because, and you probably remember this from marathons. It's like, if you stop, you kind of kill your momentum, right? So you don't want to, you only stop if you have to to get things back. But anyway, so I think with me and like I remember, and again, maybe it was because I was at impressionable age, but it just stuck with me. And like I was joking about my midlife crisis, but I think at this stage I probably own at least one silhouette of every shoe that Tinker Hatfield created, and most of them have the Nike Air Bubble. But there's just some other stuff that he did where it was just so innovative. And if you think about sneakers, it's such a like disposable kind of throwaway item. You cycle it, but that's one of the things that kind of help create the culture around sneakers. And I can walk on the street. There's like old sneakerheads, there's like younger sneakerheads, but you just kind of you create that community, right? Because you all like real knows real, right? Like you see someone wearing like a pair of like Air Max ones, the infrared Air Max 90s,
Yeah,
and you recognize it, right? You just kind of have this knowing glance, and then you go, but you're part of a community. And so to me, I think it's always great when you can create like some kind of movement that gets people together, right? It doesn't have to be world changing, it doesn't have to be lucrative, right? Like Nike probably makes money, or maybe sneaker resellers make all the money around this now these days, right? But the fact that there's this almost brotherhood and sisterhood of people who just appreciate that type of thing. Like to me, like that's something where, and again, maybe that's what in my back of my mind as an 11-year-old is like, man, marketing is awesome because it creates this sense of kinship between people.
creates this
Yeah,
movement and the sense of
the
community.
sense of
Yeah,
community. So yeah, so that's one that stays with me.
that's awesome. If you had to choose a theme song that plays every time you walk into a room, what would it be?
That's a good question.
Would it be the Batman opening theme from Michael
The
Keaton's
Danny
version?
Elfman Batman.
An original
Yeah,
original?
I think I would just get
Would
quizzical
it,
looks because there's some people who would know it and some people are like, what the hell is happening here? I would probably think about like I love hip hop. Too many artists who speak of maybe like De La Soul or something like that, like Me, Myself, and I,
yeah.
or something like that still like bops, that still slaps, as the kids would say. Randomly, I'll just say Me, Myself, and I by De La Soul.
You'll know if people listen to this podcast if they play that for you every time you walk
Okay,
in. So here you go.
okay.
I'll ask you one more question. What's something you believe that would be a huge deal in your life that turned out to be completely forgettable? And vice versa, something small that ended up being surprisingly important.
I think something that felt huge at the time, but that was just like clear in the review now is like I think when we got laid off at WeWork, that sucked, right? Like I think, and it wasn't. I didn't take it personally because there were literally 2,600 other people who overnight, through no fault of their own, were kind of sent packing, right? And that's ultimately like organizational failures, like when you run out of money. And of course, the CEO left before we ran out of money. But I think that felt, like devastating because, one,
Felt like the end of the
it felt
world.
like the
Yeah,
end of
you
the
put
world
so
because,
much into it. Your
yeah,
heart was in
my
it. And yeah,
absolutely. Like, I mean, to this day, I talk about like some colleagues there and even just people in like different walks of life that I run. And sometimes I ask myself, like, where was I the happiest or for a little amount of time when I first started WeWork, like the sky was the limit. And, I know the company's taken all kinds of beatings, like people just pounding on it, that kind of stuff. But I will stand by what I said. The talent density was great. The opportunity was huge. It really sucked when we all got laid off. And like, I was like, hey, I left Google, for crying out loud. Like my Indian mom, you know how Indian moms are.
yeah,
She
there
never
you
forgave me for leaving Google. Still to this day, right?
How could you leave
Yeah, yeah.
Google?
Who
Yeah.
leaves Google? Like, and
It's like you're a doctor.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. That's exactly right.
You hit doctor status when you were at Google.
Exactly. That's so true. So true. Yeah. So like, that felt like it was going to be something, oh, this sucks. What am I going to do? Do I go back to Google? Does Google even have a job for me? But I think now clearly we've seen layoffs happen, right? And like, all kinds of things happen. Just because, something happens, like, your job is not your identity, right? And like, I think
Right.
it's very hard. Like my CMO, like who I work with very closely, his name is Robin Daniels, great guy. Maybe somebody you should have on your podcast. I would definitely recommend it. But
Love
yeah, so
to.
like
Yeah.
he's like I'm the Batman to his Robin, or so, like maybe sometimes I was a Robin to his Batman. But like I saw him, like he took it very hard because his identity was he was such a public figure there that he took it hard. And when you see a good friend and even yourself, like you were working on towards something that felt so purposeful, it does suck to all of a sudden be shut out of that, or like the market shutting you out
Yeah.
of it.
So that was big, but it
So
turned out to be not as
not as
important as you
important.
thought. What's the other way around? Something small that ended up being surprisingly
Yeah,
important.
yeah. Random acts of kindness cost you nothing, but people remember it, right? And I think, it could be in a professional setting, it could be in personal settings,
Yeah.
but, just the other day, I caught up with somebody who's like navigating like the job market, and he reached out to me. It had been like some time. He's like, Indy, like I remember when we first worked together, one of the first people who were just so kind to learn about my background and that kind of stuff. We had coffee, and that still sticks with me. And I would love your advice on something. And I'm typically empathetic by nature, and I enjoy connecting with people. It felt small, but I guess for that person, and even for me, like the fact that something that I did, like just that obviously didn't cost me anything, but that I just did because of who how I perceive this person, and like being a newcomer to the company, I just welcomed him. That has a different payoff, right? So completely different scale of measurement of those kind of things. But I think in this day and age, and I think we're seeing it left and right here, but kindness costs you nothing. If you can help someone have a better day or better onboarding, treating everybody with grace, I think goes a long way, and people remember it. And I think, unfortunately, people also remember when the opposite happens, right? And kindness doesn't cost anybody anything, and it can mean it can change someone's trajectory.
But it could change the world for me.
I think so.
Yeah. So Indy, I got to tell you, I really enjoyed this. It was so much fun to talk with you. You have so much insight and perspective that we kept you going. And I deeply appreciate your time with us.
This was super enjoyable on my end. Thank you so much for taking the time.
That was so much fun to have Indy with us. He produced it was like an insight machine. It was like almost every 30 seconds there was another one. And I think the one thing I will take from him as an ecosystem person, he remembers everyone's name. So whether it was the person he worked with back at Google or the people he worked with at Salesforce, he remembers everyone's names, and the impression or the insight or the boost they may have offered to him or he was able to offer to them. And I think that's so important when you're building your career and when you're thinking about how to connect folks together. You put that together with his notion of the product being the partnership, the notion of APIs and how they cleanly connect and how they need to be seamless. I think these are amazing insights that Indy was able to bring to us as part of his spectacular rise across so many of the tech giants in Silicon Valley. So love having him on. And frankly, I never thought that he would do so well at Batman. My team just couldn't believe that he nailed the King Tut one. So great to have you on, Indy. And I'm glad everyone had a chance to enjoy this. So thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this pod, please take a moment to rate it and comment. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and everywhere podcasts can be found. The show is produced by Anand Shah and edited by Sean Marr and Laura Ballant. I'm your host, Rajiv Parikh from Position Squared, an AI-centric growth marketing company based in Silicon Valley. Come visit us at position2.com and definitely go download our Arena offering. This is an Effin' Funny production, and we'll catch you next time. And remember, folks, be ever curious.